What does Australia's latest breakthrough mean for the future of quantum computing?
And how are Facebook's VR prototypes set to make the metaverse more immersive than ever?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hey there, welcome back to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined as always by Alex Kidman, an old timer who almost crumbled into dust this week when he heard that the iPhone is now 15 years old. Alex, that's 105 in internet years. Is the iPhone looking pretty good for its age?
Look, I'm going to argue, at least when we're talking that original iPhone, the answer to that question is no, because we're talking a small screen, pretty awful resolution, but really critically, no apps. Everything on that first gen iPhone was either Apple supplied and approved, or you had to hack it onto there. It was only when they came into the second gen that they said, hey, other people might want to develop software
Yeah,
for it. So it's important, no doubt. But that 15-year-old iPhone, it's a little metal slab, but it's not a good phone.
but if you wanted apps, then you must have been holding it wrong because it was perfect.
Steve told us so.
So, speaking of aging disgracefully, we're also joined once again this week by longtime Australian tech journalist and Byteside founder Seamus Byrne. Seamus, the iPhone might have outlived its rivals, but do you think it's earned a spot in the Tech Hall of Fame?
Yeah. I mean, right when it comes to Hall of Famers, it's absolutely one of those devices where, especially in that, one of my favorite all time stories about that first iPhone was when apparently the BlackBerry boardroom laughed about it when it was announced because they just thought, how could you possibly get enough battery life to be able to do all those kind of clever, multi-touch systems on a screen? And then once they got their hands on one, apparently their jaws literally kind of just went, oh no, when they saw that they achieved it by putting a giant battery in the back of that thing. Because, of course, all the other smartphones, with the keyboards, but they really did kind of have tiny batteries at the time and just accepted that you could only do so much with them. So I think in a big way, that idea of going, what if you mostly made it battery was one of those revolutions that suddenly everyone else went, oh, wow, you really could do a lot more computing if you put enough battery in a thing.
Which is funny because the iPhone gets criticized today sometimes for its
nowadays.
battery life. But thinking about what phones were like back then, it was a bit of a revolution.
Yeah.
But that thing was chunky. I mean, this was a phone that Sir Mix-a-Lot would have approved of in real terms. That's how it got away with that.
Yeah.
So Seamus is here this week to talk about virtual reality, and Apple seems ready to throw its hat in that ring. But Facebook's parent company Meta is already forging ahead, and it recently showed off an impressive range of prototypes designed to make VR more immersive. But first, big news in the small world of quantum computing. Seamus, there's been another breakthrough by Australian researchers. What's it all about?
Yeah, so the Australian Silicon Quantum Computing team, I think they're called SQC, led by Michelle Simmons, who I believe was previous, was it Australian? Was she Australian of the Year, or was it one of the sort of subcategories of Scientist of the Year or something?
Are you sure
Anyway.
she's not a sports person? Could she win
Yeah,
Australian of the
that's
Year?
Do we
why I'm
make
like-
people who can't hit a ball sport
Yeah, it must have
person
been
of
a
the year?
special
It
category.
seems fair.
Anyway, spectacular brain out of UNSW has been, over the past decade, really leading the charge on a lot of local quantum computing research. And that's not to denigrate an actually amazing series of different teams and organizations here in Australia. We really do punch above our weight in this space at the moment. But her category of research has been focused on that idea of trying to find kind of silicon-based systems and ways in which to genuinely integrate quantum technology alongside more traditional systems of like circuits and gates and things. And that's the big achievement this week, has been actually creating a true quantum integrated circuit and having a series of 10 quantum dots all perfectly aligned to be able to ultimately, they've said they were able to make it simulate an organic compound, which is just something that traditional computers super struggle to be able to do anything like it.
And to my understanding, which is not great, I'm not a scientist, this is what they call quantum simulation rather than quantum computing strictly. This is like designing circuits that will do terribly specific things, not designing quantum computers, which can then be programmed to do all sorts of things, right?
Yeah, it's a really good point, isn't it? Yeah, when we talk about AI, I mean, and this is a kind of tier of stuff it is, isn't it? Where people always kind of dream of general purpose AI, where it isn't just aimed at one specific problem, which almost every AI in existence is ultimately just something trained to do one job very, very cleverly. And this is a bit like that. You're right, that it is about sort of saying, hey, we've been able to design a circuit to do a very specific task, but that specific task is something that we could not do under other conditions. So yeah, it's exactly that kind of thing. And you're right, that's then where some of the other teams out there, there's like Sydney Nano, which, Sydney Nano is the name, but it does a lot of quantum computing research. That the teams over there are, more focused on different kinds of quantum computing research in those more general purpose type categories, and those kinds of systems where they have to like run them at these super ridiculously low temperature kinds of systems to be able to make them functional.
So we used to talk about bigger and bigger supercomputers, and you had your Cray computers and the things that the Bureau of Meteorology would do to do weather forecasting and stuff like that. We don't talk so much about supercomputers anymore. Why have we got away from this idea of just making them bigger and bigger and bigger? What is it that quantum computing could do that a traditional supercomputer couldn't do, even if you made it as big as the MCG?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think you're right that we've almost been able to keep solving more problems by throwing more compute power at them. You mentioned the kind of Cray type systems. I remember reading recently that that when it comes to weather forecasting, that as much as we always love to complain about the traditional complaint of like they never get it right, and it's like, well, actually, I think I read that over the last couple of decades we've moved the accuracy of forecasting I think what used to be the accuracy that was available in a window of about 6 hours prior to an event, that actually weather forecasting is now accurate out to about like a week, in that same sort of level of accuracy of the old days. And of course, then the short-term forecasts are now incredibly accurate by comparison to the old systems. So it's like just by throwing raw power at this stuff, you can do a lot. But yeah, I do know someone who's researching in quantum computing right now, and they said that they are literally focusing on the maths of what are the kinds of problems that literally cannot be done by traditional computing systems. And in that regard, it's like this is actually one of those important areas of research, because they are trying to work out what is it that just more raw power won't actually solve. And so I know they've been coming up with mathematical models and formula that is the kind of thing where it's like, by trying to solve for near infinite kinds of problems, that's the kind of thing that actually you need quantum computing to start pursuing, because you need a whole different way of, what do they call that classic superposition aspect of quantum computing, where it's not just ones and zeros, it's everything between a 0 and a 1 as well, is kind of a possible combination of calculations. And
so it's Schrodinger's bit.
Schrodinger's bit. Yeah. And it is really hard to then think, what do we do with that once we have that capability? And I think this kind of research, again, where it's this sort of blended idea of what can you do with a quantum circuit? It's absolutely that kind of thing of thinking, well, are there ways in which we can do protein simulations and all sorts of things? And as literally saying protein simulation, I seem to remember that there is some giant Google computer that recently managed to spit out like all these protein models that they couldn't do only a few years ago, but again, throw enough raw power at it and they're starting to be able to do some of that. So it's really hard to even say what exactly is it that we're going to be able to do with this stuff, but that's kind of exciting, right?
So speaking of things that are really hard, one of the things that I've always struggled with, and I got asked this question on radio this week, so I'd be really interested in your definition of it. Explaining what quantum computing is to the layperson, because I think most people kind of get your standard computer. What people are almost certainly listening to this show on is a standard computer.
I'll be impressed if you're listening to it on a quantum computer.
If you're listening to it on a quantum computer from the future, congratulations, please like and subscribe. But Seamus, what would your definition to the layperson of the difference between a classical computer and a quantum computer be?
It's a great question, and I just have given up trying.
I
really, because it's hard. I think, as much as you can talk about what a bit means in a qubit kind of context versus a traditional bit, I think, it's absolutely about that idea of, I guess, just trying to point out that these kinds of computers aren't. These are more like what IBM talked about in the early days of computers, and that idea of, well, the market for quantum computers might only be a handful in the world one day,
the five richest kings of Europe and all that.
Yeah. And I mean, IBM is a leading player in quantum computing in terms of that research space. But, I think in that even 20-year timeline, you sort of think this is the kind of stuff that research systems are going to find incredible things that can be uncovered by throwing this kind of technology at it. But in terms of everyday compute, it's like most people should, it is the kind of thing we point to, like space programs, or it's like, well, maybe one day we'll all go to space, but for now, let's be happy that some scientists are able to do really cool things that they couldn't learn if they weren't growing those things in zero gravity.
Somebody from the University of New South Wales team who I interviewed about it told me that using a quantum computer to solve most problems is like using a 747 to go to the supermarket.
Incredibly impressive, but kind of wasteful.
Yes.
That's a really good one.
I mean, I think the best definition that I've ever seen or read for the average person was to imagine flipping a coin. The classical computer is the heads or the tails of the coin. The quantum computer is every single state, including the heads, including the tails, including the spin, and including the relationship to every other toss that you do, which is why it's more powerful, but also so much more specialized. But equally, I know I've talked to a few scientists and kind of mentioned that, and they said, yeah, look, that's actually a bit of a simplification. That's where my head
That was the point. Yeah, that was the point.
It's like you're almost there,
think
but
about
not quite.
multiple outcomes at the same time. So it can take something that's got so many outcomes that a traditional computer just can't get its head around it, for want of a better term, and can sort of consolidate that down. And I've heard that as James said before, one of the key applications probably going to be for it is things like chemistry, things like developing new chemicals, new polymers. A really good example I heard was looking for new ways to make fertilizer, because the way they make fertilizer at the moment produces a lot of heat and produces a lot of energy. And if they can do that at lower temperatures, the difference it will make to the amount of energy we use in the world and pollution and stuff will be massive. But it's the kind of problem that you just cannot tackle with a normal computer, because it's not a mathematical problem as much as it is it's not a standard problem, it's a biological problem. Like, it's at that next level of magnitude of difficulty.
Can't you just get colder cows?
That'd be it.
Done. I mean, why didn't they ask you earlier?
Yeah, well, obviously
could have saved a lot of time and money.
Although one of the other use cases, or one of the, maybe not use cases, one of the problem fields, it feels like to me, that always comes up with this as well, is the idea of breaking encryption. That in theory, the mathematical possibilities of quantum computing lend themselves to breaking current forms of encryption, which are viewed as essentially unbreakable because of their complexity. But is that something we actually want?
I mean, look, Alex, no criminals will ever get their hands on quantum computing to do such. Oh, no.
In their evil lair under a volcano.
It's not so much the criminals, it's the governments as well. Yeah. Like it's every possible aspect for which encryption can be used positively. If this breaks it, well, we're back to hiding things under our pillows.
Yeah. Though I think, at the same time, there's definitely, if anything, it's the second there's more of these in the world, it's if you haven't gotten around to setting up your two-factor authentication, it's really the right time to do it.
Yeah. So what are the big challenges ahead? Because we're still sort of at the very early stages of this, aren't we?
Oh, yeah.
What are the big challenges? Someone said to me that if quantum computing was a moonshot, then what they're doing now is basically Yuri Gagarin's just gone up into orbit.
Yeah, and that's probably a good analogy, right? That, that commercialization is, I guess everybody who funds this stuff is hoping, how far are we from commercialization so we can get some return on this investment? That it's, Yeah. Look, there's so many of these things, and I'm sure it'll come up in the VR discussion as well. But it's like the old, 5 years from now, this might get really good. And 5 years is the eternal 5 years away, it seems. But yeah, I think these are these breakthrough moments. Yeah, and I guess now and then you see the news headlines about these kinds of moments. But this is a genuinely exciting time to be able to have, achieved this kind of really specific functional alignment of a circuit in this way is something that is a genuine breakthrough. And it's the kind of thing where, again, being able to even just demonstrate a new kind of modeling that has been made possible by this, as much as it's still really early, it absolutely does speak to a lot more of what is going to become possible over the next few years. And it's that'll, I guess, probably think about Elon Musk putting SpaceX rockets, up, but the re-landing the boosters, right? Remember that there was quite a while there where they were crashing an awful lot every time they would try to land, and then that first one landed, and then kind of that sequence of how regularly it worked got faster and faster and more common, and now it's just now it'd be weird if one of his rockets didn't land on the drone ship. So I think that's what we'll kind of see from this is, okay, they've been able to create a circuit to do this specific task. Then it'll be like, hey, we've now made, whether it's just being able to get the process to make exactly the same thing multiple times more efficiently, and likewise testing out different kinds of alignments and orientations to be able to simulate other kinds of molecules will, be really interesting.
And that's one of the key challenges is that a lot of the records they've broken now, like there's this thing they call quantum supremacy, where they look to perform a calculation that would be pretty much impossible for even the most powerful supercomputer. But they always, well, maybe rig it's not the right way to put it, but they always design the problem to suit the computer. Like these computers aren't at the position yet where you can take any kind of real world problem and feed it into a quantum computer and get an answer. So that's the big thing we're waiting for, is not just quantum supremacy, but real world practical quantum supremacy.
Yeah, and another thing that actually one of the Australian labs is really good at, what do they call Q Control? They're a company that is actually just focused on improving the software that controls the quantum computers, because the fundamental nature of a quantum computer has all this variability and kind of excitement of atoms involved. That means there's sort of errors to be managed in the way in which you're looking at the performance of a quantum computer. And it's sort of interesting that they've seen there's actually a really good niche there in being able to create software that is able to filter for those errors and kind of correct and manage it in order to help the current level of what's possible give better performance, and then likewise continue to be able to push forward in performance the more we make. So it's kind of, there really are all these different facets to what it means to make that next generation of quantum computers. And thankfully, there's a whole bunch of Aussies out there who are currently leading the world.
So, as long term listeners might be aware, I'm someone who doesn't tend to strap on VR glasses too much, mostly because they tend to make my head spin, and not in a good way.
Yeah, especially not after lunch.
No, not after lunch. It's never pretty. But recently, Meta, Mark Zuckerberg's company, was getting busy. They've been busy for some time, but they got busy actually showing off what they've been doing. Adam, was this good news for folks like myself who find VR more than a little disturbing?
Maybe, because it depends on what it is that actually upsets your brain with VR. Because there's quite a few challenges to getting VR more a more immersive version of VR, and I think part of the problem probably is that it's the uncanny valley. Your brain realizes this ain't quite right. Therefore, you can say
Therefore,
goodbye to your lunch.
Yeah.
But once they get it right, and I've seen even with the early versions of VR, what they have. I don't know if people have heard of zero latency. It's a gaming thing in Australia. I spoke to those guys when they were building it in a garage in Melbourne. I was like the first journalist that they talked to, and I went around to their place in the middle of the night to test it out. I was like, okay, guys, people know I'm here. Like if I turn up dead, it was a bit like that. But so I tested it out, and one of the things that really impressed me and this is very early sort of stuff, but they had it wasn't that it looked real, but the lag when you turned your head was short enough that your brain was convinced that real. And what really impressed me is that I was afraid to step off the VR cliff. I had to really force myself to do it, because even though it didn't look real, that survival instinct deep down inside said, no, that looks like a long way down, and when I move my head, it appears to be real, so we ain't going nowhere. Now, Seamus, there's a lot of other challenges they've got to tackle like that one before VR gets closer to the point where it can trick not just your survival instinct, but the rest of you into thinking this is real. What sort of things did Facebook talk about as the challenges, and what did they show off as the possible solutions?
Yeah, I was actually really impressed by the whole session that they did, where they were showing off a lot of here's what the work has been over the past 5 years, and the fact that they really did set up their teams to pursue a lot of different threads on what was going to be important to the future of VR. And so they had a mixture of things like getting the resolution at a much higher level, and using a benchmark of just being able to read an eye chart like you would be able to if you went to visit your optometrist, and thinking about sort of that context to say, yeah, how do we get the resolution at that kind of level, and how do we get things like eye tracking to a degree, because they kind of then realized, if you want to do resolution, actually, one of the clever tricks we're going to have to achieve is to really focus on exactly where the person's eye is looking, and then manage we can slow down the rendering of other areas of the screen right now because it's not exactly where the person's looking.
Which is kind of what your brain does a little bit. It doesn't
exactly.
It doesn't process your peripheral vision in the same way it processes what you're actually looking at.
Yeah. And so, having different teams exploring those different aspects, even things like the brightness of the screen, again, in order to make your eye kind of more comfortable and adjusted well into what you're seeing in there. Some of that meant that they've been playing with tech that is like, motorized lens movements in order to try to do eye tracking that is as fast as your eye is going to actually move, in order to get the that, I guess, the effect right. So again, that your eye doesn't catch it out and be able to go, oh yeah, I can tell that something weird is happening here. And then right through to just kind of getting a lot of these different pieces to work. I guess, one of the other ones was how thick the glasses are going to be on the front of your face, because there's just that general discomfort if it sort of starts to hang forward, and it makes you almost want to tilt your head down after a while. And so coming up with whole new lensing systems and using like laser lighting systems in order to be able to kind of bounce through lens in a more efficient way. So I really did like the whole process, and that they ultimately framed it around what they did refer to as the kind of VR visual Turing test, and the idea of saying, okay, if that long-term aim is to work out how can we pass a test where someone could have VR on their head and their brain would truly be able to go, I'm actually not sure if this is just a real thing, or if it is, something that's being rendered in front of my eyes. And as much as that's a really far future kind of idea, at least for me, it felt like it meant you could see they're like, how do we work towards this? And ultimately, they were comfortable throwing current tech under the bus, saying, yeah, we know there's lots of problems right now. We know that this stuff isn't perfect. But by letting the research teams work on multiple different ideas and then kind of say, here's what we think the ultimate headset might be. And by the way, this is, it's nothing but a drawing right now because we're not even close. It did feel like a good, all right, let's just pull back the curtain a bit to at least show you that we're working on a really long-term vision here.
So, question without notice, visual Turing test, I presume we are talking here of indistinguishable reality. What are the ethical considerations of that? Because that feels both technologically wonderful to me and dodgy
Scary as hell.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's totally an important debate to have. but I kind of just really do like that by at least planting a flag on what we, because even right in like the gaming context, of course, for so long, gaming was all about, oh, how can we make it look more realistic? And I'm definitely in that camp where you go, how do you make it look more stylish? That's what I want. And I think that's where I'd be happily looking at, a VR future where you kind of go, yeah, just give me cool, totally unrealistic worlds to explore and yeah, make the fidelity as good as possible. But yeah, I don't want you to pretend I'm an office worker in, in this other version of reality. Make it a really cool alternate reality.
Avoid that Matrix future, basically.
Yeah. But that's it. I think I like that they just put this kind of flag in the sand, and and they didn't invent the term. They even sort of said but obviously they're the kind of company that helps to popularize a certain kind of idea. But within that whole space, there's been a lot of people starting to refer to that idea of a visual Turing test, and so they're going, well, yeah, okay. What happens when we start to let our team just chase that idea and the various aspects of tech that need to be solved in order to get there?
It's part of the challenge that there's two ways to look at VR. There's to look at VR as the consumer entertainment sort of device, and to look at VR as the uh, telepresence working with someone remotely device. And those, while the gaming tends to get more of the attention, it's actually the enterprise stuff that looks like it might have the bigger future, and they are bigger challenges. When you're playing a game, it doesn't matter because it's not real. When you're in VR having a meeting with somebody, you don't want to have to necessarily believe it's real. You just want to be able to forget that it's not real.
That's exactly it, isn't it? It's the forgetting what you're swimming in.
Yeah.
The like, what the hell is water kind of question, right? It's like, yeah, just do enough that makes me stop feeling awkward about the moment I'm in. So I do have a VR in room set up here in my living room, and I'm still on the original HTC Vive because I have to say, kind of each of the upgrades over the past 5 years, I've kind of looked at and thought, yeah, like that's a little bit better, but it's not really getting to anything dramatically better when I've managed to test some of the different hardware that's come along since. So I personally feel a bit disappointed with how slowly it's been going in some regards. But yeah, I think like one really great comment I heard, because I did have a catch up session once with some HTC folks who, and they said they now use this sort of telepresence VR to catch up with people, in different offices around the world. And, again, for me, I had to like turn on my living room rig in order to get it working. Whereas they sort of said they're now at that point where they've just got the nice kind of wireless desk style headsets. And so they can kind of just stick that on and then basically be immediately in a meeting room with colleagues all around the world. And I love the experience of it. And actually, it did surprise me how well it works, because even things like, I'm holding the wands and I'm waving my hands. And of course, my avatar in that space is waving hands in a way that, you guys can't see that right now because I'm just in a 2D window. Whereas when my whole body's here, I'm like gesticulating wildly just out of shot. But suddenly you have more of that conversational feeling between people. And likewise, everybody in the VR space, you could be sitting around a boardroom table, but everybody will be looking at the person talking, and you can see that in everybody's avatars that they're all looking at the person who's speaking, and it does feel more like you're really there. But my favorite weird psychological thing that I've heard about in a different conversation, and it is about getting those meeting rooms to feel right, was that they found that if you put a door, I think this was researched by Meta, but they found if you put a door in a meeting room, then people start wondering where the door goes. And so they kind of get distracted by the door. And if you have no doors, people kind of freak out because they're just like, this feels really claustrophobic. Right. And so what they worked out was best was to have just like a little
Windows?
alcove.
Had they
I was thinking a window, unbreakable window.
Yeah, having windows. But yeah, one of the things was just kind of just the way that you could be in a meeting room where there's like a little corner where the door happens to be just slightly out of view around a corner, like a hallway just off to the end there. And you could go over there if you wanted to go and see what's just around the corner. But that idea of kind of going, oh yeah, I'm sure the door's over there somewhere. Yeah,
Just
and
to
then people just
reassure you.
didn't
Yeah.
worry. So there's so many layers to that idea of, what does it mean to make people comfortable in these spaces? That's a lot more than just make the resolution better too.
I would have thought that the killer application for that kind of higher resolution stuff, telepresence is great, and obviously it's a big market, would be things like virtual heart surgery. That if the best heart surgeon in the world is not available, I would rather they were in the room fixing me up for
Yes.
sure. But if the best heart surgeon in the world, if she lives in Johannesburg, then I want her operating on me via as good a system, as high fidelity a system as possible. And obviously there are other, robotic elements and bits and pieces, but I would have thought that kind of virtualized, specialized work would be the other thing that this would be, in a business sense, really, really useful for, really
Yeah.
valuable.
And look, I've heard a fantastic application of exactly that sort of an idea has also been that being able to scan the patient's body and to genuinely have a full, perfectly detailed model of your patient so that you actually know where the target is and can then, I've seen it done in a version where they actually will 3D print the whole body so that the person can essentially conduct which like
There's an episode of Doctor Who like this.
I was going to say, I don't think anybody wants to see a 3D print of their own body.
Yeah.
No. Someone told me my ass was this big.
don't put it in front of the actual person. Just give it to the doctor to do some essentially dry runs with.
Yeah.
And then at least they can feel extra confident going into the actual surgery as well.
I know not to chop off that bit, but this is roughly where the things I'm meant to be messing with are.
It's like Blades
Glad
of Glory.
I didn't do that. And didn't
Blades of Glory. I chopped his head off 20 times, but I know what I was doing wrong now. This time we'll be fine.
Yeah, I'm going to get it right next.
So what kind of prototypes did Meta actually show off? You said some of them were just drawings. They're just very conceptual. What are they thinking or planning?
Yeah. So there was one called Butterscotch, which was like a high resolution, because of course there's code names galore, but there was a high resolution prototype that was called Butterscotch, which kind of looks just like any other ordinary VR headset. Then there was another one called Starburst that was focused on brightness and HDR. So, that kind of classical, I guess, we know it now from movies.
That was far from wearable though, was it?
Yeah. So that one was the one where it's like got two large handles. And so you can hold it up to your face, but like you can even see the classic like
so it's a VR
PC
periscope.
fans.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like, a very, very advanced version of, the Viewmaster.
It must have been noisy as hell because those cooling fans were above each eye. So like several inches away from your ears.
And then, so their pure concept was called Mirror Lake. And so that was really trying to embed all aspects of the tech into a headset that only has almost like traditional glasses style, frames effectively. But that their aim for that one is to include, and this is where it gets really weird in my sense, because of course everybody knows as well that augmented reality is one of the big targets. And Meta's approach to that idea would be that there will be camera systems so that you can see what's happening in the real world, but it's still being mediated by the lenses. And so you're effectively seeing a video screen of the real world out in front of you with other things then layered on top. But then everyone else will see a video version of your eyeballs on the outside of your glasses.
I am definitely awake and not asleep in this meeting. My eyes are open.
Yes. So look, I think, they had a whole wall of prototypes as well, right? Which again, I quite liked that it was really about showing you working, right? Which is like that classical thing of going, in many ways, most people won't care, but for people who care, it's nice to kind of go, all right, there's been like 20 different prototypes on the journey over the last 5 years. And then some of the sort of future versions, I think another one was called Hollow Cake. And that was the one which is trying to get that really slender version of a headset to be as comfortable as possible. And that's the one that uses like laser lighting systems and, cleverly layered lensing systems so that it effectively like bounces backwards and forwards inside the lens a couple of times before going to your eye, which reduces that whole need to have a gigantic area outside of your eyes for all the lighting stuff to happen in. So, that were all the different kind of aspects of it. And, I think they were basically joking about the fact that we're not going to see any of this stuff genuinely enter any of the new headsets that they will launch in the next couple of years anyway, either.
So, do you think part of the reason why they were showing this is because they want the metaverse to feel a bit less like vaporware?
I feel like part of it might have been for Mark Zuckerberg to convince the market that there's a real reason why they have gone all in on like spending tens of billions of dollars on metaverse kinds of concepts. As much as he has full control over the company, there is nothing that the shareholders could do to vote to change the course of action that he wants to take. But what they can do is, tank Facebook stocks, and over the next few years, as Facebook itself has kind of hit that ceiling of users, because hey, most people on the planet have access to it now, and they start to kind of lose traction compared to other platforms for younger audiences. All those kinds of commercial issues that shareholders at least start to go, maybe my stock has peaked and it might be time to move to other investments. That I think part of it is trying to really, sell that idea that there's real work happening behind the scenes. And even if, the Ray-Ban stories are a bit of a non-event so far, and even if the next Oculus that comes out is just slightly better than the last one, that they really are trying to work behind the scenes to make something bigger happen by the time we get to the end of this decade.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Seamus for joining us for the show.
Very welcome. Thanks for having me.
And Seamus, you've been on the show before. You know what's coming. The Vertical Hold 3 questions of doom. I will ask all 3 questions, and then you can answer them in any order you like.
Okay.
Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And our current big contentious question, what's the worst thing you ever spent your own money on?
That's a really good last question. So biteside.com, of course, and you can find me at Seamus on Twitter is the main place. The worst thing I've ever spent my own money on, I have memories of some weird, you know what? I'm going to like really throw it out there and say my PSP really... It was,
sir, you wound me.
I thought it might kind of engage Alex there, but I thoroughly enjoyed it for a while, but boy, oh boy, did that whole UMD format just become its own giant hamstring around that device.
True.
And the idea that they even thought, you know what, we can sell people whole new movies on this new disc format at full movie price, like we've sold it to them before on other things. And I think I probably do, though, still have that little box of those things. But ultimately, the only things I ever still, because I kind of have it floating around still, but, searching for game UMDs doesn't happen. But now and then kind of going, what is still installed on this thing because of Thanks Digital Store? That's the one thing that ever gets used.
So the only UMD movies that I've got are promo ones that got sent to me. I don't think anyone ever bought a UMD movie in Australia.
Yeah, I seem to remember Will Smith's movie Switch or something like that was, or no, Hitch. That's Hitch.
Yeah.
That had a UMD.
Like the 3 HD DVD movies that every journalist in Australia has of a certain era.
The little Xbox doorstop HD DVD player. Yeah, if I bought one of those, that could have topped the list.
That would have topped the list, yeah.
And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at verticalhold.com.au on the web, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page, possibly coming soon to a Meta VR headset near you.
And a reminder for our regular listeners, we're thrilled to have Aussie Broadband as our sponsor this year, and they've given us a special promo code which gives new customers a $10 per month discount for 6 months when signing up online for an unlimited plan between NBN 50 and NBN 100. The promo code is vertical, so hopefully that'll come in handy for Australian listeners shopping around for a great broadband service. And once again, thanks everybody for dropping by, especially if you're using a quantum computer to listen from the future. Don't forget to tell your friends about us, and leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.